Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Yes, you have entered into Virgin Most Powerful Apologetics Dojo, and where we learn how to share and explain the faith with confidence, clarity, and charity. I'm your host and sensei, Gary Michuta. It's great to be with you today, and as always, we have a great show in store for you. It's always fun to talk about apologetics and all the things involved in it. Not only just defending the faith, but helping people who are converts, once they come into the church, many times, they have trouble adjusting, fitting in. And the thing is that although, they might not feel like they fit in, they do have a lot of great gifts, a lot of things that our Lord developed while they're outside the church, and now that they're in our fold, they got great things to share with us. So our guest today is Master Apologist Matt Swaim is going to join us. He's with the Coming Home Network and kind of an expert, I think, on people coming into the church. And so what we're going to do, we're going to talk about converts. We're going to talk about the gifts that converts brings to the church. And in many ways, the church has been fortified and helped in, I'd say, the last few decades by a flood of very knowledgeable, very holy non-Catholics entering into full communion with the church. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking about gifts and converts. So that'll be a lot of fun. He's going to come on the other side of the first break. And as always, we have our critical thinking skills. We're going to talk about the finding of the fallacy for today. And by the way, the finding of the fallacy is the argument from silence. Very quiet fallacy indeed. And we're going to meet an early church father. And the early church father today is TATIAN the SYRIAN. TATIAN the SYRIAN. So, before we get things underway, I want to give my shout out to all of you watching on social media, on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Great to see familiar names there in the chat room. And also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio, both in the United States and outside the United States, and, of course, listening via internet, podcast, and all the other great stuff. Great to have you on board. Thank you so much for listening to the program. And, by the way, thank you for sharing. Tell people about Hands-On Apologetics. Share the programs. You're basically sharing the wealth. We have lots of great guests and great topics like yesterday. We had Dr. Robert Delfino. We went deep into Aquinas' third ways, the proof for the existence of God. He had amazing analogies. And afterwards, I emailed him and I said, thank you. There's a lot of things that you gave that I'm going to steal. And then, of course, not steal. I'm going to share. But I'll give him props. I'll give them a hat tip for all those great analogies. But anyway, tell your friends. Share the programs. Spread the wealth. And, and together, we can become what we call this, dojo of people learning, explain, defend, share the faith with clarity and charity. So thank you very much for all those who have done it. And please, tell your friends. The more the merrier. All right. So without further ado, then, why don't we jump to the finding the fallacy for today? And as I mentioned, it is the argument from silence. Now you might think, how can you have an argument from silence? Silence is nothing. Well, you're right in a way. The argumentum ad silentio. The argument from silence is to express a conclusion that is based on the absence of statements in historic documents rather than their presence. In other words, you're trying to build a house with bricks that are missing. Now, this occurs a lot, Actually, I think the best example of the argument from silence is put out by a group of Baptist successionists. Baptist successionists claim that they can trace historically their faith back to the apostles. Okay, there's not very many Baptist successionists out there, but they're famous for a tract known as the Trail of Blood, and that is one giant argument from silence, because basically what they say is we really don't have any evidence for early, apostolic Baptist and post-apostolic Baptist, because the Catholics have wiped out all the records, so they've erased history. And so it's really the absence of evidence that proves that they exist. And of course, they'll go through it and find some heretical groups and kind of claim that, the Gnostics and the Manichaeans and the Albigensians and the Waldensians and those type of groups are actually crypto-Baptist, even though, quite frankly, they're not even Christian. But a lot of it's based on this idea that, the Trail of Blood is like that the Catholic Church kind of erased from history any trace of these early Baptists, and therefore the absence of evidence is actually proof that they exist. I should also note, too, that you can make an argument from silence that's somewhat valid, but it takes a lot of argumentation. If you can show in the historical context that something it had to have been mentioned in a particular context, and it's not, that could be a piece of evidence. But that's hard to do. For example, if someone says all these books and only these books are inspired, and they don't mention a book, then that could be construed as, you could make an argument from silence in that case, but it's awfully hard to do. So generally speaking, if you're trying to use the absence of statements in historical documents as proof for something, by and large, that commits the finding the fallacy for today, the argument from silence. All right, folks, why don't we jump to meet the early church father? The early church father for today is TATIAN the SYRIAN, who flourished around 165, 175, somewhere around there. Very little is known of Tatian's life, and even less about his death. He was born in Syria. He was also born a pagan, and like St. Justin Martyr, who we've mentioned a few programs ago, he sought the true philosophy, and he found it in Christianity. Now, his wanderings brought him to Rome, where he actually became a pupil of St. Justin the Martyr and joined his school. But whether he already was a Christian before he came to Rome or after, or, when did that conversion happen, we simply don't know. Whether Tatian actually, was baptized at that point, before, during, like I said, that's kind of up in the air. Tatian, by the way, according to Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers, was in all things an extremist. He took nothing at half measure. He went full bore no matter where he went. And so when he returned to the East around the year 172 AD, he founded, a Gnostic sect called the Encratites, which is also known as the Quarai, because of the fact that the fanatical rejection of the use of wine. In fact, they were so emphatic that wine should not be used that they actually substituted water for wine in the Eucharistic elements. Others rejected and discouraged second marriages. So if your spouse dies, they either discouraged or actually rejected the validity of remarrying. And in fact, but Tatian's sect even went so far as they even reject first marriages, which is, Jurgen says, is quite possibly the reason why this sect didn't last very long. They weren't getting married, they weren't having offspring, so guess what? They just didn't last. So he's best remembered, however, for an arrangement of a harmony of the Gospels known as the Testaron. The Testaron is basically where he takes the four Gospels and he harmonizes them so that they cover a single continuous narrative. And until the 5th century, this was the official form of the Gospels used in the liturgy in the Syrian church, and it seems to have had considerable influence upon the Gospel text in the church as a whole. We're not really sure whether the Testaron was written in Greek or Syriac. That's debated by scholars, and only fragments of it have survived the ages in either of these languages, but the entire text can be reconstructed from the extant translations in Latin, Arabic, and quite remarkably Middle Low Franconian. Commentary on the Testaron, this harmony of Gospels that TATIAN the Syrian made, a commentary was written by Ephraim the Syrian, and it has survived in its entirety in an Armenian translation. So, TATIAN, quite a spectacular life, even though we only know fragments of it. Outside of the Testaron, the only extant work we have from TATIAN is his address to the Greeks, which was written in Greek. It was dated after the death of St. Justin, roughly around AD 165. And we're not really sure whether this work was written before or after he founded his Gnostic sect, the Aquarii, but it probably was written shortly before 172 AD. We really can't be certain. And but 165, 167 is a very good guess when it was written. And he shows no moderation. There's lots of invective and turpitude against the Greeks. And that is our Meek Early Church Father, TATIAN the Syrian. Coming up next, Matt Swaim and Converts Bearing Gifts.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These two gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands On Apologetics. And during the break, I was just looking at the chat room, and yes, apparently I need to give a hat tip to Ricky. Ricky has done an outstanding job formulating his emoji explosion. And by the way, all of you on YouTube, I just want to say how much I appreciate you listening to the show and participating. And I do enjoy the emojis explosions, by the way. So, I don't want to be unjust and not recognize you guys. So thank you for joining us at the social media posse. And while we're trying to get Matt online, I thought, Christmas is right around the corner, folks. And we, of course, are going to be buying gifts for people. And in order to share the faith, it's great to have great resources. And so maybe while we're getting Matt on, and by the way, it appears that Matt is trying to call in through Skype, but there's no answer, Rich. Just FYI. I thought I'll give you a couple of books that you might consider to, share with people and share the faith. One book that is a classic, if you want to try to get somebody hooked on apologetics, this was the book that hooked me. And so I always recommend you pick it up. It's Carl Keating's Catholicism Fundamentalism, put out by Ignatius Press. And when I first read this book, it was amazing because I didn't realize there was, and there still is, full-time Protestant ministries that their only goal is to pull Catholics out of the church and into their own denominations. So Carl goes through that. He debunks a lot of the myths that were circulating back in the 80s, and they're still around. And he also gives great advice on how to become an apologist, which books to read, things to consult. Just a really great book. Also, one more recommend before we go to our guest. Try to give them a copy of, I would say, Theology for Beginners, especially if they're not into theology. Maybe they don't know much about the faith, but they don't have an adult appreciation of the faith. Get Frank Sheed's Theology for Beginners. That's a great pickup for them because he very simply, clearly goes through the faith, and he really brings it alive. I mean, he's a fantastic writer. So without further ado, why don't we get to our guest? And our guest is none other than Master Apologist Matt Swaim. Matt grew up in a strong Christian family, attended a United Methodist, Nazarene, and Free Methodist congregations all along the way. While studying media communications at Ashbury College, he discovered G.K. Chesterton and started getting curious about the Catholic faith. And before he knew it, he joined the church. He's worked on Catholic radio for nearly a decade. I'm sure it's probably over a decade by now. And he currently is at the Coming Home Network, which he joined in 2016. And you can check out some of the great stuff he does there at chnetwork.org. Matt Swaim, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Hey, Gary, always great to chat with you.
Yeah, well, hey, for some reason, the dojo is always a little brighter when you are the guest on the show.
Well, that's great because the dojo doesn't have windows, I don't think.
Well, it does, but it doesn't let in a lot of light. So, so anyway, the topic today is really cool because it's basically converts bringing gifts. There's so many gifts that non-Catholics bring to the church. And the thing is, you're really at the forefront of, with your work at Coming Home Network, of kind of like people entering into the church. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, this is something that is just huge because so many people who come into the church, there are a lot of people who come back to the church from being Catholic and then going off and being basically nothing for a number of years. There are also people who come from no faith formation at all, people who are atheists or agnostic or just never really cared. But there are a lot of people who come in from evangelical Protestantism, Anglicanism, Orthodoxy, any number of Christian backgrounds, and were involved in some level. And what was part of what drew them was a desire to grow deeper in their faith. And in the course of that, It was their desire to be more and more plugged into their Christian faith that brought them into the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Some of those, as you know, were Protestant pastors. Some of those, as you know, were people with masters in divinity or doctorates sometimes even. So the question is, well, what are you supposed to do now that you're Catholic? Is there a place for you to use those gifts? And it's interesting. So the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a number of years ago, released something that they call the Minimum Profile of Formation for Former Protestant Ministers Who Desire to be Ordained Catholic Priests. If you want to Google that title, have fun reading it. It's a real thriller.
Hey, with a catchy title like that, I'm sure it is.
So they look at all these things for if you're a Protestant pastor, what needs to be the case if you want to become a priest. They look at human formation, intellectual formation, and scripture, theology, sacraments, canon law, pastoral formation, the number of years that you will go through. Guess what? A tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the Protestant pastors we deal with ever end up becoming Catholic priests. Most of them do not. Unless they were already, for instance, an Episcopalian priest or an Orthodox priest or sometimes a Lutheran pastor, chances are they're not going to become a priest.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you do?
Well, because, through no fault of their own, they're out of the Catholic communion, and maybe God does, they did have a vocation or a legitimate call. And so coming into communion, full communion with Christ through the church, it's like, okay, how do you discern that call now that you've entered into the church?
Yeah,
obviously it can't be the same thing.
Yeah, this is the thing that a lot of them deal with is was God tricking you? Was that call illegitimate? Did you hear him wrong? And the answer is usually, no, you heard God correctly, but he was calling you in phases. He was lighting the next step on the path for you, and the next step, and the next step, as he does with all of us in all areas. And so this is something that's a struggle for us to try and figure out how to communicate to bishops, because a lot of times bishops don't even realize that they even have these guys in their backyard, and gals for that matter, because for Protestants, their idea of ministry is different than our idea of ministry. So, for instance, we don't usually use the word ministry unless we're referring to something that a priest or a deacon does. Mm-hmm. For Protestants, ministry means any way in the world that you use your gifts to the glory of God. So someone might be a music minister or a youth minister, but what they do has nothing to do with sacraments whatsoever. Or they might have a ministry to teach or preach, or a soup kitchen ministry. We wouldn't call that a ministry in Catholic parlance, because ministry usually has to do with the sacraments. So part of this is a translation issue of figuring out, do I have a work to do in the church that's not necessarily at the altar, behind the altar, consecrating the sacraments. The thing that a lot of people don't realize about these Protestant pastors especially is that to be a priest in the Catholic Church, you got to be ordained, right? You got to go to a bunch of school, you got to have all the formation, you got to get ordained so you can stand at the altar. For a Protestant pastor, you have to be a skilled public speaker. You usually have to be a financial administrator. You usually have some background in counseling. You usually have some formation in teaching and preaching and scripture study. And so all these are things that you can employ in the church without having to become a priest. I mean, how many parishes do you know that need good financial administrative help? How many people do you know who say, I've got issues, I wish I could find a good Catholic counselor to talk to, and things like that. So part of the issue at the Coming Home Network is figuring out, well, what are some of the ways that those gifts could be used in places that the church is really lacking skilled help in? So that's part of it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, in fact, I know priests who are really burdened by that because, their parishes are large. They might have a Catholic school attached. And so not only do they have to fulfill their priesthood, but they have to deal with all the the tedious stuff, with financing and budgets and things like that, things that, maybe, that wasn't really part of their call, and so, there are great needs to be filled in that area, that and counseling, things like that.
Yeah, counseling, like I say, the whole administrative aspect of this too, but also the preaching and the teaching ministry. If there is a sucking void in parish life today, it's one that you and I try and fill in kind of a rogue way. You're right now doing adult faith formation. And how many people come to people like you, or people like Catholic Answers, or people like the St. Paul Center with Scott Hahn and everybody else, to go find adult faith formation because they don't have it in their parish?
Yeah.
And this is something that, to be honest, it's kind of a tricky thing, because if you are someone who has taught Sunday school, for instance, let's say you don't have a master's in divinity or a degree in theology, but you always taught, a group of 20 people in Sunday school, and you loved it, and you got deep into the Word by doing that, well, you kind of want to jump in because you see that missing in a Catholic parish, and you want to dive in head first, but you don't want to overstep your boundaries, and sometimes a priest is nervous to let you do that because they think, well, until you take some serious classes and get certified, we're not sure we want you to do that. I feel like we got to do a better job of figuring out how to sort of lower the administrative, bureaucratic stuff that inhibits people from using their gifts in that way, because there are people who love and know the scriptures or history or theology who could plug in right now, but there's kind of a barrier there to letting them do that. So in one sense, you've got the people who have the gifts who aren't sure exactly how to use them. In another sense, there's sort of some unnecessary roadblocks for them at the parish level that kind of stand as inhibitors to really let them do that. So it's kind of a two-way street that's got some stuff that's got to be cleared on either side.
Yeah, that's true. And it's even with Catholics. Let's say they go to seminary, they get a degree or a certificate for catechesis. Many times, might teach something that's solid and good, but they lack that experience of making a dynamic, Bible study or a dynamic program, something that will be welcoming and bring people in. That's not something I think that is part of the air we breathe as Catholics, but it is part of the air that non-Catholics breathe. You know what I mean? So there's a whole skill set there in addition to the knowledge. Oh, I hear the music. I'm sorry. We'll continue that thought on the other side of the break, Matt. We're chatting with Matt Swaim about conversions and the gifts that converts bring to the church. Lots of great stuff ahead. Stay tuned. You listen to Hands On Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show and the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Wow. Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
This is Terry Barber. I want to invite you to take advantage of having your funeral or your loved one's funeral at the Sacred Heart Chapel in downtown Covina. It's a 115-year-old church. beautiful chapel. And all you got to do is call me at 661-972-7872, and I'll personally make the arrangements with your mortuary to have your funeral or your loved one's funeral here at Sacred Heart Chapel. You won't regret it. 661-972-7872. God love you.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist Matt Swaim about converts bringing gifts. And, you know, Matt, some great points early on that there are many people who enter the church that are formally educated, have lots of great experience, maybe had a legitimate call, you know, from the Lord, certain skill sets that really need to be utilized by the church. Isn't that true?
It is true. You know, one of the examples that we refer to here at the Coming Home Network is Elizabeth Ann Seton. And St. Elizabeth Ann Seton is a unique kind of person because here's this lady who was, you know, fairly well off, was kind of in high society as an Anglican, and everything went bust with her husband's business, and she was, you know, kind of relying upon the help of a bunch of other people. And in the course of this, she became Catholic, and there went her social network, you know, and
yeah.
But she was a smart lady who'd been well-formed. She'd been taught charity by her father, who had, you know, worked in medicine. And so she had all these gifts and smarts, as it were. And now she was Catholic and trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do with myself? There are two kind of things that I like to look at in her case. So first of all, she sought ways to use her gifts in existing church structures. So she took the gifts that she already had and saw what was already going on in the church and tried to figure out how to plug in. She at one point was doing a girls' school. She was education was something she knew she could do. But she also, having gotten her footing a little bit with that, used her gifts to create something new for the church. So in some ways, Catholic schools already existed in the United States. There were seminaries, obviously. There were some schools in New Orleans and in the Spanish missions in the West. But there was no organized system of Catholic education like the one we basically just completely take for granted today. Mm-hmm. So she took something that was kind of already there in the church, but then expanded on it and created something new. And now the whole entire parochial system that we have is basically based on the methods and the expertise and the insights and the hard work of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And I think that's one of the things that people who are frustrated with, they've come into the church, they have these great Christian ideas from their background as evangelicals need to do. They need to realize that you're not going to find a 1-to-1 ratio. You're not going to find something exactly inside the church like you had outside the church. But there are things that are going to be similar enough that you can use them as kind of a jumping off point. And maybe your complaint that is there's nothing in the church that really uses my gifts. Maybe that's part of a call. You know, maybe that's God saying to you, well, why don't you do something about this? And then that's not saying that you need to come in and take over the church, which is another major pitfall that converts experience, which is, all right, I'm Catholic now. What can I be in charge of?
Yeah, right.
That's a major pitfall. But it isn't to say that those gifts are meant to be wasted and shelved. That maybe there is something that you can bring to the table and either build off of something that's already here, or, you know, kind of piece by piece, you know, with discernment and providence and humility, begin for your parish or independently of a parish.
Yeah, that's a great point. For those listening who have just entered into the church or thinking about it, there is going to be that learning curve, and you're kind of entering into an area where people have been working. So sometimes don't think that you're just going to open up a brand new box and transform the parish overnight. You do kind of have to work within the system, and either elevate something that's already there, or like Matt said, you just find something that needs to be done and start from scratch.
Yeah, and bear in mind, I mean, think about the most famous convert in the history of the church, St. Paul. All right? I mean, here's a guy who is educated at the feet of Gamaliel. He is a Pharisee of Pharisees. He parades out his credentials in a few of his letters, right? And then he has this major conversion experience. And if anybody has the legitimacy to go talk about Jesus, it's a guy who got knocked down on the road by our Lord himself and can claim the title of apostle because of it. I mean, that's pretty good credentials.
Right.
But what's Paul do? He goes off and, sows tents for like 3 years, right? Because it's not time. And there's some things he's got to kind of learn. Among them, he's got to learn how to articulate clearly what it is that God has got for him now. Right. But he also has to realize that he's the new kid on the block, and he can't just walk in and say, "Hey guys, I'm Paul. Everybody listen to me." That there's got to be some trust that's built up too. And that's a hard thing for converts to kind of get their head around, that just because you're in the church now doesn't mean you need to go take it over and be in charge of everything. Maybe part of this phase is sort of this learning moment where you can kind of get a lay of the land before you jump in and start taking things over. Yeah,
I agree. And that can be very humbling too. For example, I know one fellow who came into the church who did music. He was in charge of music ministry at a very, very large, almost like a mega church, but it was Presbyterian church in the area, and very well accomplished musician. Became Catholic, and went to the choir director and said, I do all this stuff. I worked here. I accomplished all this. I'd really like to do something here at the parish. And she said, well, we'll remember your talents, and just kind of brushed them off. And it's like, in one sense, everything he said was true, and he is incredibly gifted. But, there's still, it's a very humbling experience when you kind of end up where you were, at the front in your church, and then you end up, being the newcomer in the Church of Christ,
You've had Ken Hensley on a number of times. I mean, Ken recounts the story of, leading hundreds of people as a pastor of this American Baptist congregation, being well regarded. Then he becomes Catholic and ends up waiting tables, and this experience of sitting in the back folding napkins, and this the manager of the restaurant's like, "Hey, fold those napkins faster." And he's thinking, just a couple months ago, I was leading a room full of people. What's going on? Yeah. So there is that frustration. But I remember when I first came into the church, my last kind of stop was playing Christian rock, alternative and metal, going out and doing concerts in basements and coffee shops and stuff like that. And first thing that I found was actually kind of the first opportunities to open up were people like, "Oh, you play bass. Why don't you play bass for the worship band at Mass?" And my immediate reaction was, no way. You don't understand. First of all, my background is as a performer. Second of all, music served a very different function in the worship services that I used to go to than it does in the Mass. Yeah. And I know enough to know that I don't know what I'm doing, right? That I don't have a sense of what music is supposed to be in the church, and I'm not ready to get up there and do things like that. And I'm glad I said no. I feel like that was the Holy Spirit saving me from myself, because now looking back, I realize exactly how far apart my idea of music in church was from what the idea of music is in the liturgy in a Catholic sense. So, yeah, I mean, not everything that you have is meant to be used indiscriminately. Is another point here.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, that would be very strange to be playing, speed metal bass, during a liturgy.
Yeah. Also, I wasn't really into the musical style, but that's a different. I mean, I wasn't into playing, fabric softener commercials from the '70s jingles, kind of music. It wasn't my idea of jamming out.
That's right. So there's it's a humbling process too. But eventually, I guess there has to be a lot of prayer and discernment, doesn't it, as to where you fit in the scheme of things.
That absolutely has to be it. And this is something that converts kind of have to get over. So I went to Asbury College, as you mentioned in the little promo. It was in a 4,000 person town Wilmore, Kentucky, where you had Asbury Seminary on one side of the street, Asbury College on the other side of the street. About 1,200 people going to the college, 1,200 people going to the seminary, 4,000 people in the town. You do the math. I mean,
wow.
Everybody there kind of had a certain pedigree.
Yeah. And
there were like 30 churches in this town. And there was this thing, we used to joke about it. Every time someone would get up and preach a sermon, everybody in the pews would be like, I know how I'd preach this one.
Yeah, right.
And this is something that converts, even those who don't have those degrees, I mean, it could be a really frustrating thing for them to hear these rich gospel passages. I mean, we're spoiled as Catholics. We get a first reading, a psalm, a second reading, and a gospel every Sunday. I mean, and we get almost that much every weekday. Mm-hmm. And then you hear the pastor get up and say, well, what the Lord is saying here is that when someone cuts you in line at the grocery store, you shouldn't get angry. Please stand for the petitions.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You're like, oh, but didn't he see what Jesus was doing with the Pharisees? Yeah. So there's this real frustration, and again, I've seen people who get angry and walled off and think, well, I'm just not going to get involved because this is just dumb. I'm just going to show up in the back, just do what I've got to do. And next thing you know, all the gifts that they've had have kind of atrophied.
Yeah, right.
You can still do a Bible study in your house without having to get your pastor's permission.
Right.
I think that people don't realize that. You can still take those readings, and one of the best ways to do a Bible study is to take the lectionary out and look at what's coming up on Sunday. And even if it's in your own family, only in your own family, you still got an opportunity to teach and use those gifts and that love of Scripture.
Very good. Well, chatting with Matt Swaim about conversions, converts, and gifts, and more to come on the other side of the break. Listen to Hands On Apologetics. I'm Gary Machuda. We'll be right back.
This is Jesse Romero.
And I'm Terry Barber.
From the Terry and Jesse Show. And we invite you to listen to the Holy Hour of Power, High Energy Catholic Radio. We're two Catholics with a PhD in common sense. We're on Monday through Friday on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
What we're going to give you is masculine Catholic teachings on the faith. We say we're too inspired to be tired, we're too protected to be dejected, and we're too renewed to be subdued. Why? Because we believe in Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church, and we will take each issue of the day and show you how the Catholic Church has the answer for our culture. What we really do is bring men back into the Catholic Church, which it's about time to do. We want men to be leaders in their Catholic faith so that they can bring their family to heaven.
Our program is not right versus left, it's right versus wrong. And our program is where Catholicism and culture intersect. It's High Energy Catholic Radio.
We're going to inspire you to fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church.
The Terry and Jesse Show on the Virgin Most Powerful app.
Jesus said to the apostles in Luke chapter 10, "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." According to St. Boniface, In her voyage across the ocean of this world, the Church is like a great ship being pounded by the waves of life's different stresses. Our duty is not to abandon ship, but to keep her on course. May our Lord help us remain ever faithful to His Church, to aid and defend her.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're talking about converts and gifts in the Catholic Church, and we're talking with Matt Swaim, who's given us some great insights. And, Matt, actually, just kind of taking off from where we were on the other side of the break, I know many converts, they're on fire. There may have been pastors that, had huge congregations that are just, ripping and growing and just on fire. They become Catholic. They end up in a parish that's kind of ossified, dying because it's growing old, and maybe the teaching and preaching is not very orthodox. It's very wishy-washy. And, they try to fit in, but they can't. And you mentioned, at-home Bible study, and I know from my own personal experience, there's nothing preventing us from, they can make a Bible study and become friends and invite parishioners to it, just at their home and start lighting a fire with the parishioners, and that will grow, and before you know it, you could transform that parish.
Well, think about all the things that that really help bind some of these evangelical churches together, that make them more vibrant and kind of community-based. Of course, they don't have the sacraments, so they're missing the big thing that keeps us Catholics together, even if we don't like each other, right? They're missing that glue. But they have seen the fruits of small group ministry. They have seen the fruits of when I was working at Family Christian Store in my high school and college years, we had a whole section in the back of the store full of postcards that you could buy in bulk to send out that said, "We missed you at Sunday school this week," right?
Right.
This is the kind of thing that, paying attention to people. These people are wired to pay attention to people. They're wired to be able to gather a group to themselves or join a group. And again, you don't have to overcomplicate this. So that's part of it. I think another part of this is that, how many times have you been to a parish and they describe on their bulletin that they're a welcoming community or whatever, and you realize that what they mean by welcoming community is that before Mass gets started, someone stands up and says, "Please stand and greet everyone around you." Yeah. And that there goes 15 seconds, and that was the entire – that's their entire welcoming program.
Yeah, right.
You've seen it done right if you're – a person who's a Sunday school teacher, or I'm not even talking about pastors. I'm just talking about people who have been a small group leader or whatever. You've seen it done right, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to not incorporate this entire overhaul, but maybe just think of one small practical thing that worked well and connected with people, and say to your priest, "Hey, would it be okay if we tried this? I would be happy to take the lead on it." And start small, because bear in mind, your pastor's got a million things going on. You can't even hardly talk to him after Mass because there's 3 or 4 people who are going to pin him down at the end of Mass.
True.
So, think of something really small, concrete, and just approach your pastor with it and offer to take the lead on it. Because your pastor just mostly wants to know, is this going to be something that I'm going to have to micromanage, right?
Right.
And if you can make it that small and that concrete, but something that you know makes a difference, then you've established a beachhead, as it were, right? You've established a way to concretely and intentionally get yourself more involved in the life of your parish. And like I say, it could be something different for everybody. There's no one size fits all for this, but I think that all of us, if we were to look around, could say, I know one thing I could do.
Yeah.
One thing.
Yeah, that makes all the difference too, because when I ran my apostolate, there wasn't a shortage of great ideas. I mean, people would always come up and say, "You need to do this, you need to do that," and they might be really good ideas for my apostolate, but the problem is, I don't have the manpower. I can't babysit the project, from beginning to end. If they said, "And I will carry it out for you, I will do everything. You don't have to worry about it," I would have gave thumbs up immediately. And pastors are the same way. It's just coming up with an idea and telling them, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. That won't fly. But if you're willing to put yourself on the line and say, and I will carry it out, I will do the work, I'll make sure this succeeds, you're more chance. I think you probably get a 95% chance that he's going to say, good, go for it.
What if you were to buy a bunch of rosaries and a bunch of little cards that say how to pray the rosary and say, Father, I'd be willing to just stand at the back at Mass at a table and give out free rosaries and free guides to pray the rosary if I could get permission to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you put in whatever the front end investment is, say, I'll pay for the rosaries, I'll stand back there after the 8:30 Mass. Yep. Would it be okay if I did that? Some pastors will say no, right?
Yeah.
But if they do, it's probably not because they hate the rosary. But you never know. I mean, it could be something as simple as that. And who knows how many conversations you might have with somebody just because, hey, free rosary. And you might actually learn somebody's name in your parish. Who knows? That's crazy, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, that's true. And, and don't always think about, it has to be something church-based, Unless I work, inside the church, then it's no good. There's so much you could do outside of the church, just with programs that the church runs, or like we said, with the Bible studies, or just fellowship groups, or prayer groups, or, and you could start from there and really fortify the parish, and then maybe things in the church will open up.
Yeah, I mean, and think about the growth of Catholic radio. Think about what Virgin Most Powerful is doing. Does the Virgin Most Powerful radio crew have to have permission from the archdioceses where it's, positioned before it makes any move? No, it's lay people who got it together and were like, hey, you know what? We're going to be in line with everything that the church teaches, and we'll be in cooperation with whoever we got to be in cooperation with, but let's just rock and roll. Let's get the word out,
Yeah, the whole Catholic radio.
Who's actually supposed to be about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, so be the solution to the problem. Don't just come up with ideas, because trust me, administrators or, bishops, priests, they have plenty of people who give criticisms. You ought to be doing this, stop doing that, do this. It's a lot easier when someone is the solution and say, I will take care of this. I will, if you let me, I will do, I'll be behind this and I won't abandon it.
I do have one other tip regarding that. If you put it in writing for your pastor, if you say something verbally and then back it up with something in writing, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because that's a language they understand, right? When it's put on paper.
Yeah, and it could be, you need to look at that where God is, wants you to serve. Don't just go there and say, well, there's no room at the end. Okay, well, that's so much for that. Okay, I'll just fulfill my Sunday obligation and,
Yeah, well, it is very easy to get frustrated and discouraged. But bear in mind, you may be an expert Protestant, but you're still a baby Catholic,
Yeah, that's really well put. Yeah.
And that's a big part of this is that, no one would say, I'm going to go to China and I'm going to tell Chinese people exactly how they should live. I mean, you barely, unless you are someone who's like a diplomat, that's one thing. But like, you're in a new culture. They just do things differently. There are things that are normal to them that are weird to you, and normal to you that are weird to them. And you just have to bear in mind that people have different comfort levels. It doesn't make them necessarily right or wrong, objectively speaking. It just means that they're used to things being a certain way. And some of that could use improvement. But you know what? Some of you could use improvement too. I mean, this is part of why you came into the church, is because you knew what you had was incomplete.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, okay, so let's say someone's at their parish. Maybe they're on adult education commission or something else. And, how should they utilize new converts? What's the best way that what we could do as Catholics to help them discern, where their role is in the body of Christ?
Learn their name and say hello to them every Mass when you see them. This is one of the hardest things for a new convert, is they feel like they've come into the church and nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Just say hello to them. Learn their names. Learn their spouse and their children's names. Learn their parents' names. I know this sounds like really crazy in 2019, but see if they want to go out for coffee or come over to your house, heaven forbid, for dinner. Like, let them into your life. They're used to being let into their fellow churchgoers' lives. They're used to wanting other churchgoers in their lives. So just, say hello. Do like a little big brother, big sister system with them or something. I mean, honestly, it's not that crazy, and they're not going to say, oh, I don't want any of these Catholics talking to me. They came to church because church used to be the place where their entire social structure was based.
Yeah, right.
They want you to say hello to them. And a lot of times they're one of the biggest initial shocks is, I'm new and nobody noticed there was a new person here, because they're used to places where people notice that there's new people there and they have a welcome wagon to go get them. So, I mean, you don't have to make it complicated. Just learn their names and say hello.
Yeah, I don't think that was always true in the church, though. I know, as a young kid, we had so many different groups, women's groups, men's groups, sodalities. It was, in a way, the church really was part of the social structure of every Catholic, and that's something that's kind of disappeared. And now, like you said, you could go into church and be somebody, a complete stranger no one ever saw, and it's surprising if someone would turn their head and even notice that you're there, let alone know your name.
And I think part of that's because we don't have Irish Catholic neighborhoods anymore. Where like everybody on the block all goes to the one church. I mean that's part of it. But I think part of it is that we're just sort of walled off in this age where we're more connected digitally, but less connected interpersonally.
Yeah.
And we just got to get over some of that, man. We got to realize it's 2019. We're just gonna have to work a little harder to make it work.
Yes, that's right. Or at least get their name and number so you can text them.
There you go. So you can tag them on Instagram, whatever you got.
That's right. Send them a thumbs up for becoming Catholic.
That's right. Gary liked your conversion.
Well, Matt, where can people go to get all the great stuff you guys do at Coming Home Network?
Please come to chnetwork.org. We've got 20 years of conversion stories, over 1,000 testimonies, and
yeah, very good. chnetwork.org. Matthew, so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. And coming up next, the fun continues with the Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you. And it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for listening. And God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing called Hands on Apologetics. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.